My name is Juanita Boyles, 34 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed stability was something you built slowly, brick by brick, with discipline and patience, not something you stumbled into by luck. That belief carried me through 12 demanding years in tech, starting as an intern who fetched coffee and debugged code at midnight, climbing my way up to a senior software architect role at a major company. 6 figures, stock options, long hours, constant pressure. None of it fell into my lap. Every promotion came at the cost of missed weekends, canceled plans, and a master's degree earned while working full-time. I didn't just have a career, I had a foundation I'd poured myself into. When I married my husband, I thought that foundation was something we stood on together. He worked in pharmaceutical sales. Solid job, decent commissions, around $85,000 a year. He liked to say he was doing just fine, and technically he was. But our life, the penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, the vacations, the dinners we didn't check prices for, existed because of my income. Our rent alone was over $6,000 a month, covered by my salary. His contribution went toward his car payment, his hobbies, and about $1,500 a month for shared expenses. At the time, I didn't keep score. We were married. What was mine was ours. Or so I thought. We'd been together 6 years, married for 4. I supported him through 2 job losses, paid for his car when it was repossessed before we got married, reassured him when he felt behind his peers. I told myself that was partnership. That love sometimes meant carrying more weight when the other person needed it. Things felt fine. Not perfect, but stable, comfortable. Until 3 weeks ago when he asked me to sit down after dinner. He had that tone people use when they're about to deliver news they've rehearsed. Serious, careful, almost ceremonial. For a split second, I wondered if someone had died. "We need to talk about our future," he said. My stomach tightened. I nodded, bracing myself. He talked about values, about how much thinking he'd been doing, about wanting a traditional family. The words sounded harmless enough until he finally said it, looking me straight in the eye. "I want you to quit your job." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't process that sentence as real. I waited for the punchline. He didn't smile. "I'm serious," he continued. "I want a wife who's home when I get back. Someone who cooks real meals. Someone who focuses on our family instead of working 60 hours a week." "We don't even have kids," I said, still trying to understand where this was coming from. "Exactly," he replied. "And we won't until you're ready to be a real mother. Not a career woman who hands her kids off to nannies." The phrase career woman hit me harder than I expected, like it was something shameful, something dirty. I reminded him calmly that my job paid for our apartment, our lifestyle, nearly everything we enjoyed. He waved that off, saying promotions were coming for him, that his regional manager had hinted at big things. When I asked, because without my salary, we'd be moving into a studio. That was when his voice hardened. "This isn't a negotiation," he said. "You quit your job and we build a real family, or I'm done. I can't be married to someone who values spreadsheets over her husband." An ultimatum. After 6 years together, after everything I'd carried for us. I sat there in silence, not crying, not yelling, just feeling something settle into place inside me. It wasn't heartbreak, it was clarity. This wasn't about family, it was about control, about shrinking me down so he could feel bigger. "Okay," I said. His face lit up with relief. "Really?" "No," I continued evenly. "I choose my career." The relief vanished instantly. He started pacing, accusing me of choosing work over our marriage, saying I was supposed to fight for us to compromise. "You said quit, or you leave," I replied. "That's not a compromise. That's a demand." He snapped, then saying he'd pack his things and I'd regret this. "I'll help you," I said calmly. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. He expected tears, begging, a breakdown. Instead, I walked to the bedroom, pulled his suitcases from the closet, and started folding his clothes neatly. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked finally. "Your mom's place," I said, "or your brother's." He tried to backtrack to soften the ultimatum, suggesting part-time work, as if that had ever been on the table. But something fundamental had broken. "I don't want to be married to someone who sees my career as the enemy," I told him. He left that night with 2 suitcases and a look of complete disbelief, as if the ground had shifted beneath him and he hadn't noticed until it was too late. I slept better than I had in months. The morning after he left, I woke up before my alarm. The city still quiet beneath the windows of the penthouse. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. The space beside me in the bed was empty, but it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like air. By the time I made coffee, my phone was already buzzing. missed calls, text messages stacked on top of each other. The first few were almost reasonable. We need to talk. Last night got out of hand. Then they shifted. You're being dramatic. You can't just throw away a marriage like this. By the 10th message, the tone turned sharp. You'll calm down. You always do. That line stuck with me. Always do. As if my emotions were a phase he could wait out. I didn't respond. Instead, I changed the entry code to the building and the smart lock on the apartment door. When we moved in 3 years ago, the lease had gone entirely in my name. His credit wasn't great back then, leftover damage from the car repossession I'd helped him recover from, so the property manager suggested keeping it simple. At the time, it felt irrelevant. We were married. Paperwork didn't matter. Now it mattered a lot. I went to work like any other day, sat through meetings, reviewed designs, made decisions that affected entire teams. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, I felt like I was watching my own life from a distance, noticing details I'd ignored before. How often I'd softened my opinions to avoid bruising his ego. How many times I'd justified carrying more because he's trying. By the time I got home that evening, the missed calls had turned into 17. I scrolled through them once, then put the phone face down on the counter. Day 2 brought my first call from his mother. She didn't bother with the greeting. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded the moment I answered. "Good morning to you too," I said, keeping my voice level. "My son is devastated," she continued. "All he wanted was a real family, a real wife, and you threw him out like garbage." "He gave me an ultimatum to quit my job," I replied. I declined. "He chose to leave." "You made him leave," she snapped. What kind of woman chooses work over her husband? "The kind who paid off her husband's debt and supported him through 2 layoffs," I said before I could stop myself. There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line, then she hung up. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, feeling the final thread of obligation snap. That conversation confirmed something I'd been trying not to name. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource. Day 3, he started texting about his things. Not about us. Not about fixing anything, just inventory. "I need my gaming set up. When can I get my weights?" "The espresso machine is mine." The espresso machine had been a birthday gift, bought with my card, but I told him he could come get his belongings as long as I was there. He pushed back, saying it would be easier if I wasn't home. "No," I said, "I'll be present or it doesn't happen." The word trust hovered unspoken between us, or rather the lack of it. By day 5, the tone shifted again. Reality started to creep in around the edges. I looked at apartments. He texted, "How are you affording that place alone?" I almost laughed. "I make good money," I replied. "You know that." "The lease is up in 4 months," he shot back. "We should renew it in both our names this time." That was the moment I stopped responding altogether. Instead, I called a lawyer. Within an hour, I had a confirmation of what I already suspected. The lease was mine. He wasn't listed as a tenant or an occupant. He couldn't force himself back in. He couldn't claim rights to something he'd voluntarily walked away from, especially not after issuing an ultimatum and leaving. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt braced, like I was standing at the edge of something bigger. Day 6 proved I was right. An unknown number lit up my phone. When I answered, his brother's voice filled my ear, already irritated. "Hey, so my brother wants to move back in while you guys work things out." "We're not working things out," I said. "I'm filing for divorce." There was a pause. Then, "Yeah. He figured you'd say that. Look, he's driving us crazy over here. Can't you just let him stay at the apartment? You can crash with a friend or something." I had to set the phone down. I actually laughed out loud alone in my kitchen, the sound echoing off the marble counters. "So let me get this straight," I said when I picked it back up. "He leaves after giving me an ultimatum, and now I'm supposed to vacate my own apartment so he can be comfortable." "Come on," his brother pressed. "That place is way too big for one person anyway." "Then he shouldn't have left it," I replied. "He accused me of being petty, of tearing the family apart, of causing their mother stress." I ended the call without another word. That night, I stood in the living room and looked around. At the view, the furniture I'd chosen, the life I'd funded. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for taking up space. Something told me he wasn't done pushing. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of forced calm that usually comes before a storm. I knew he was coming to collect his things, and I knew he wouldn't come alone. People who believe they're entitled to something rarely show up quietly. I invited my best friend over an hour before he was supposed to arrive. She didn't ask questions. She just showed up, set her bag down, and took a seat at the kitchen island like she was clocking in for a shift. Broad shoulders, unshakable presence, zero tolerance for nonsense. I hadn't planned it as a statement, but part of me knew I needed a witness too. Right on time, the intercom buzzed. I opened the door to find my husband standing there with his mother and brother flanking him like backup. He looked thinner already, like the confidence he'd worn so comfortably had started to drain out of him. His mother, on the other hand, looked energized. Angry, but energized, like she'd been rehearsing this moment. The moment they stepped inside, her eyes lit up as she scanned the apartment. "This place is gorgeous," she said, not even trying to hide the bitterness in her voice. "No wonder you won't leave." His brother let out a low whistle. "Man," he said to my husband, shaking his head, "you really gave this up." My husband didn't answer. He just kept his eyes on the floor. They went straight for his gaming setup, first dismantling it piece by piece. I stayed silent, leaning against the counter, watching carefully. Every so often he'd pause like he was waiting for me to say something, to soften, to apologize, to change my mind. I didn't. Then he reached for the television. "That's mine," I said. "We bought it together," he replied without looking at me. I pulled up the receipt on my phone, my card, my purchase. He turned, finally meeting my eyes. "You're really going to nickel and dime me like this?" "I'm not nickel and diming you," I said. "I'm just not giving you things that aren't yours." His mother jumped in immediately. "Let him have something. You're keeping this whole apartment." "I'm keeping the apartment because it's my apartment," I said evenly. "I pay for it. I furnished it. I have the receipts." That's when the dynamic shifted. What they'd expected to be an emotional confrontation was turning into an audit, and they were losing. They moved from item to item, claiming joint ownership of almost everything. The couch, the kitchenware, the artwork. Each time I calmly checked my phone, pulled up bank statements, and shut it down. Years of being organized at work translated surprisingly well to personal life. The espresso machine came up again. "That was a gift," my husband said. "So I can take it, right?" "No," I replied. "It was a gift to you in the marital home. Gifts stay until the divorce is finalized. My lawyer was very clear about that." His mother scoffed. "You're a cold, calculating witch." I smiled slightly. Close. 3 hours later, they left with his clothes, his gaming setup, his golf clubs, and whatever dignity he had left. The apartment felt quieter after they were gone, like it had exhaled. That night I received a long text from him, paragraphs of guilt, blame, and rewritten history. He claimed he'd given me everything, that he'd been a good husband, that all he'd wanted was to be prioritized. He warned me I'd end up alone with my career, that money wouldn't keep me warm at night. I didn't respond. What he hadn't thought through was how much of his life had been built on mine. Without my income, the lifestyle he'd taken for granted evaporated. His mother's house was 40 minutes from his job. His brother's apartment was cramped. The places he could afford on his salary alone didn't come with views or amenities or convenience. He'd built a life on my foundation, then tried to tear it down with both of us inside. I was still standing. I filed for divorce the following Monday. I didn't tell anyone first. Not my parents, not friends, not even him. I just sat at my desk during lunch, signed the paperwork electronically, and felt a strange mix of relief and sadness settle in my chest. 6 years of my life reduced to a series of forms and checkboxes. No kids, no shared property, no tangled finances beyond a single joint credit card I'd already canceled. On paper, it was clean. Emotionally, it felt anything but. I thought that would be the end of the escalation. I was wrong. 2 days later, my lawyer called me back after reviewing the initial response from his side. Her tone was professional, but there was a pause before she spoke, like she was choosing her words carefully. "He's asking for spousal support," she said. I blinked. "For what?" "He's claiming he sacrificed career opportunities to support your marriage. Specifically that he relocated for your job and limited his growth." I let out a laugh before I could stop myself, not because it was funny, but because the audacity was almost impressive. "He moved because I got promoted," I said. "He was unemployed at the time." "Yes," she replied. "And he made more money after the move. We have the records." I wouldn't worry too much. I hung up and sat there staring out the window, watching traffic crawl below. The man who had demanded I quit my job was now asking the court to make me pay him because I didn't. That week, the personal attacks ramped up. His mother called my parents. I didn't find out until my mom rang me later that night, her voice tight with anger she rarely showed. "She told us we raised you wrong," my mom said, "that you humiliated her son, that you'll never find another man who'll tolerate you." "And what did you say?" I asked quietly. "I told her our daughter supported her son through unemployment twice," my mom replied. "Then your father hung up on her." That small act meant more to me than I expected. Then came the friend group. People I'd known for years started texting carefully worded messages asking what had happened. Apparently, he'd been telling everyone I kicked him out because I was obsessed with work and status, that I chose money over marriage. Funny how quit your job or I leave turned into she abandoned me once the story left his mouth. I stopped explaining myself verbally. I just sent screenshots, his texts, his ultimatum in his own words. The narrative shifted almost immediately. Apologies followed. Awkward silence. A few people disappeared altogether. I learned quickly who valued truth over comfort. The real shock came the following Tuesday. I'd just gotten home from work when I saw him sitting in the lobby of my building. Somehow he'd talked his way past the doorman, probably mentioned he used to live there. He stood up when he saw me like he'd been waiting. "We need to talk," he said. "We have lawyers for that," I replied, not slowing down. "This isn't about lawyers," he insisted, following me toward the elevators. "This is about us." "There is no us," I said. "You ended that." Inside the elevator, the silence pressed in. Then he launched into it, words tumbling out like a rehearsed pitch. "I've been thinking," he said. "I was wrong to give you an ultimatum. But you were wrong too. We both made mistakes." "What was my mistake?" I asked. "You didn't fight for us," he said. "You just let me go." I looked at him, then really looked at him, and saw the truth underneath the frustration and fear. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he admitted quietly. There it was. The confession he didn't mean to give. He'd been bluffing. He expected panic, negotiation, a slow erosion of my boundaries until quitting felt inevitable. "That's not my problem," I said. "You played a game and lost." His face flushed. "It wasn't a game. It was about our future. Our future where I give up everything I worked for because you're insecure about your wife making more than you," I said calmly. The elevator doors opened on my floor. I stepped out. "We're done," I said over my shoulder. "Talk to my lawyer." He tried to stop the doors from closing, desperation flashing across his face. "You can't just throw away 6 years." "You threw it away when you made me choose between you and myself," I replied. "I just picked myself." The doors slid shut. That night I had building security formally block his access. The illusion that he still had a say in my life shattered completely. Once the lawyers took over, I expected things to cool down. I told myself that legal processes had a way of draining emotion out of conflict, turning drama into deadlines and paperwork. I underestimated how much resentment he still had left to burn. His lawyer's formal demand arrived 3 days later. They were asking for spousal support $2,500 a month for 3 years. I read the number twice just to make sure I wasn't misreading it. 36 months of me paying the man who tried to force me out of my career because he couldn't stand standing next to it. My lawyer called me immediately after I forwarded her the document. "I've seen a lot," she said, and I could hear the disbelief she was trying to suppress, "but this is ambitious." "He says he sacrificed his career," I said flatly. "Yes," she replied. "According to him, he limited his growth to support your marriage." I closed my eyes. Memories flashed through my mind. Him sulking when I worked late, rolling his eyes when I talked about promotions, joking to friends that I was married to my laptop. Sacrifice implied intention. He hadn't sacrificed anything. He'd coasted. "He moved for your job," my lawyer continued, "but he was unemployed at the time. And based on his income records, he earned more after the move. That argument won't land well." That was the first time I allowed myself a small sense of relief. Still, the process dragged on. Weeks of back and forth emails, revised demands, thinly veiled threats. Every communication from his side carried the same undertone punishment. If he couldn't control me as his wife, he would bleed me as his ex. Outside the courtroom, the smear campaign intensified. His mother escalated from phone calls to letters, actual handwritten pages mailed to my parents' house. She accused me of emasculating her son, of destroying his future, of being everything that was wrong with modern women. My mother stopped reading after the first paragraph and tore the rest up without responding. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt entitled to weigh in. Some tried to play mediator, urging me to be the bigger person. Others hinted that I should settle quickly to avoid looking cold. I learned to recognize those phrases for what they were, pressure dressed up as advice. Meanwhile, my husband's story kept evolving. To some people, I was obsessed with status. To others, I was emotionally unavailable. To a few, I was manipulative, controlling, heartless. The irony didn't escape me. The man who demanded obedience was now painting himself as the victim of control. I stopped defending myself altogether. Truth doesn't need repetition when it's documented. The screenshots circulated quietly, the ultimatum in his own words. The messages where he said quitting my job wasn't negotiable. People drew their own conclusions. Invitations stopped coming for him, not me. Then, just when things seemed to be settling into an ugly but predictable rhythm, he made one last attempt to reach me directly. Not with anger, not with blame, with nostalgia. He sent a message late one night. No accusations, no demands, just a memory from early in our relationship when we were broke and hopeful and still believed love was enough to fix everything. He wrote about how proud he used to be of me, how things got out of hand, how maybe we could reset. I stared at the screen for a long time before locking my phone and setting it face down on the nightstand. I didn't reply, because I finally understood something that had taken me years to see. He didn't miss me. He missed the life my strength gave him, and I wasn't going to finance his regret. By the time we finally stood in front of a judge, whatever emotional charge the marriage once held had burned itself out. What remained was paperwork timelines, and two very different versions of the same story. His lawyer went first. She spoke about sacrifice, about compromise, about how my husband had put his own ambitions on hold to support my demanding career. She framed him as a man who stepped back so his wife could step forward, a quiet partner who paid the price for love. As she spoke, I watched my husband out of the corner of my eye. He nodded along, solemn, practiced, convincing if you didn't know him. Then my lawyer stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize anything. She just laid out facts. Employment records showing he earned more after relocating. Messages documenting that he issued the ultimatum and voluntarily left the apartment. Bank statements proving our finances were largely separate. The lease solely in my name. No children. A 4-year marriage. Full employment on both sides. This is not a case of sacrifice, she said calmly. This is a case of buyer's remorse. I felt something loosen in my chest when the judge leaned forward, flipping through the documents with visible impatience. When it was over, the ruling was almost anticlimactic. 6 months of spousal support. $800 a month. $4,800 total. Not the 36 months he'd demanded. Not the punishment he'd envisioned. Just enough to acknowledge the marriage existed and not a cent more. I won't pretend it didn't sting to pay him anything at all. Writing that first check felt like swallowing something bitter, but bitterness fades. Freedom doesn't. Property division followed quickly after. Receipts mattered, records mattered, facts mattered. He fought for the espresso machine longer than anything else clinging to it like it represented something deeper. My lawyer finally leaned over and whispered, "Let him have it. It's not worth the billable hours." So I let it go. He left court carrying a box that held a coffee maker and a past he couldn't rewrite legally no matter how hard he tried socially. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment about 30 minutes from his job. No view, shared laundry, thin walls, the kind of place you rent when reality finally catches up to you. He tried once more to complain through mutual friends, framing it as temporary, a strategic step. No one seemed convinced. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I ran into one of those mutual friends at a coffee shop. She hesitated before speaking, then gave me an update I hadn't asked for but somehow needed. "He's struggling," she said. "Not like homeless or anything, just adjusting. Apparently his mother couldn't help financially. Fixed income. His brother had kicked him out after a few weeks, calling him impossible to live with. His car needed repairs he couldn't afford because he was used to unexpected expenses being handled quietly without discussion. And still he told people he'd let me go. Still the hero of his own story. I listened without comment, finished my drink, and wished her well before heading back to my office. That evening, when I got home, I stood in the middle of the apartment and looked around. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. I changed his old gaming corner into a reading nook, painted the bedroom a color he would have hated, hung a framed letter in my home office, one final note from his mother calling me a disgrace to womanhood, a reminder of exactly what I walked away from. Some people collect trophies. I collected clarity. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, my life stopped feeling like a recovery and started feeling like a direction. The first thing that changed was my relationship with silence. In the beginning, the quiet in the apartment felt sharp, like it was pointing out everything that was missing. But slowly it softened. It became space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to hear my own thoughts without filtering them through someone else's insecurity. Work picked up in a way I hadn't expected. 2 weeks after the paperwork was complete, I was called into a meeting with my director in HR. I assumed it was about headcount or budgets. Instead, they offered me a promotion. Bigger team, more responsibility. a title I'd been working toward for years. I accepted without hesitation. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to soften my excitement or downplay the achievement. There was no one waiting at home who needed me to be smaller. My parents checked in often, careful not to push, but always present. One night, my mom asked the question I think she'd been holding back since the beginning. "How are you doing?" she said, "really?" I told her the truth. Some days still hurt. 6 years doesn't disappear just because you choose yourself. I loved him, or at least the version of him I thought I married. Realizing that someone would rather you shrink than grow leaves a mark. But I also told her this. I wake up every morning knowing I didn't betray myself. That counts for something. I started therapy not because I regretted leaving, but because I wanted to understand how I ended up there in the first place. How I missed the red flags. How I normalized being the sole foundation of a marriage where my contributions were resented instead of respected. It was uncomfortable work. Necessary work. Every session peeled back another layer. Control disguised as concern. Insecurity framed as tradition. Love confused with endurance. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The updates about my ex slowed over time. When they did come, they were quieter, less dramatic. He was borrowing money from friends, complaining about expenses he'd never had to think about before, still telling his version of the story, though fewer people seemed willing to listen. His mother never softened. About a month after everything was final, she mailed me another letter. This one longer, angrier. She wrote that I had ruined her son's life, that no man would ever want a woman like me, that I'd chosen ambition over my place in the world. I framed it. It hangs in my home office right where I can see it during meetings, not as an insult, but as a reminder of how close I came to giving up everything I worked for, of how far I walked away from control disguised as love. The apartment is still mine. Still too big for one person, according to people who never paid a cent toward it. Every room reflects me now, the life I chose, the future I'm building. Sometimes I think about that night at the dining table, the ultimatum delivered with such confidence. He thought it was a power move. He thought I'd bend. What he didn't understand was that when someone asks you to choose between them and yourself, they've already made the choice for you. They're telling you they don't want you. They want a version of you that's easier to control. I chose myself. I kept my career. I kept my home. I kept my self-respect. He kept the espresso machine.